Hey guys, welcome back to Tough Love Podcast with Dr. John O'Connor. Today's guest, Brianna Diorio, is our first female guest, and we were so excited to have her on the show. Brianna, welcome.
Hi, Dr. John. Thanks for having me.
So we were so excited to talk about so many things you touch on, especially nutrition, functional nutrition, but tell our audience a little bit about what you do and all the designations and degrees you hold.
Yeah, I took a little bit of a backwards route to how I got to where I am now in my profession. And I mean, I've always was really involved in sports growing up, really active. I had a fairly healthy, home as well. My parents were in that. So I had actually originally gone to school to be a Spanish teacher. So I was, in school undergrad at Monmouth University, and I became a personal trainer because I had all of my friends always saying, just train me, write me a nutrition program. I copied everything my brother did my entire life. We used to watch like Ronnie Coleman videos before we'd work out. So we were just always into nutrition and health and working out. And at that time, it was before wearing athleisure wear was cool. So I was like, wow, I can make money wearing yoga pants. This is super fun. Like, I want to pivot into this on some, level. And at that time, I was working for Mike Duffy, who is the man I credit my entire career changing legend.
Freehold down by Monmouth.
One of the most amazing people ever. And I had asked him if he had any books that I should read or could read. And at that time, I was kind of already reading some, like glycemic index books and weird things, for a high schooler in college and all of that. And he turned me on to, Paul Chek and Dr. Mercola and some of the OGs of functional medicine. And I just really loved it. I fell in love with the science, and I decided I wanted to go to graduate school. So I walked into my advisor's office the day before senior year, and I was like, I'm not going to student teach in the spring. I'm going to pick up another minor, and I'm going to go to grad school. So I went to the University of Bridgeport and got my master's of nutrition there. So I'm a clinical nutritionist. I also am a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and a holistic lifestyle coach through the Chek Institute. And then over the years, I just always loved learning, kind of have a penchant for just knowledge in general. I became a family herbalist, and then also recently I have my PhD in integrative medicine. So I'm a doctor of integrative medicine.
Love it. So, it's funny. I was looking at the Chek Institute designation. I was like, wow, okay. Now I know why I love her. He has such an incredible following that it's almost like a cult, and lives it. He's got to be mid-50s now?
Yeah, it's wild because when I did it, it was back in 2009 or 10, maybe. Before it was really cool. And I remember he actually came in the second day of the seminar, shoes off, was in this, linen kind of attire. And, he was the one who was talking about all these things that matter besides nutrition. And at that time, I was hardcore, I was, going to grad school for nutrition. I thought that was the only thing that mattered. And so I remember he came in and he said, what is the most important thing for your health? And I, shot my hand right up being an overachiever, and I was like, it's obviously, nutrition. And he started talking about things like Dr. Rest, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, these things that are actually really important for creating holistic health and actually balancing a person. And I think getting more out of your health. So it was really eye-opening for me personally and then professionally as well, looking into the emotional side of things and other factors besides just nutrition being one piece of the health puzzle.
And it's funny, when I heard Paul Chek, at that time, we have 4 locations. Now we had 1, and he was huge out west with spinal rehab and breath work.
Yes.
And I was like, this guy's amazing. He touches on a lot of stuff, and he was big with the mind-body connection. We talked off set before. And the guys that were bringing it in were big time travel surf destination guys, but had back issues or a knee or shoulder. And he did amazing work. So I love to see somebody that, I can kind of get teeth to and have some traction with them. Like, yeah, that guy was pretty amazing. So I love that to be a center person. And Mike Duffy, brings us back, and I got you by a couple of years. So I remember when he had I think it was his first location, Freehold.
No,
or was it by Monmouth?
It was right by Monmouth, yes.
Yeah. So, and then he has Freehold as well, correct? Or he did for a while?
He had one in Little Silver, and now he has the newest location in Oakhurst.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I want to say 18, we're going to say 31 years ago, we saw this person. We were like, wow, the whole family's fit.
Yes.
And we were just intrigued because that wasn't something you saw back in the day. Like here, you talk about your brother, like you might have saw that, but you look around and the rest of the family's like banging down carbs and this and that. It wasn't there. With our chiropractic background, we have a family full of chiropractors. It's pretty intriguing because I know in my house, we grew up and we both share some Italian roots here. It was funny watching my family eat when like 17, 18, I was pivoting and I was just actually coming through being paralyzed with GBS and I was pivoting to like grilled chicken, pasta, rice, sweet potato, glycemic index. Everybody was like looking at these things, and I wanted to be lean and fit. And then you're looking at your family and you're going, carbs, 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 like pasta, this, that, and I think for the first 3 or 4 years, and then when I started chiropractic school, I think my mom was traumatized.
Yeah.
What happened to my Italian son? You don't eat any of my food, and then she had to adapt. And then it was like, she got used to me eating flats of eggs and cracking out the yolks and balancing it out. And so, but I do think it's something to be said about how we find our way, right? Like, cause at that time, before I went into chiropractic school, I had met my wife, and really her dad was like my inspiration. I always laugh. I remember walking into the house, and it was a monster of a house. And there was this mountain of a man sitting at the top of the stairs. And this was like, 90s. So, of course he had on the little Speedo shorts. And I'm laughing and go, dude's pretty jacked. And I'm built, but I'm like, oh, that's dad. He had the Magnum PI mustache going. Nice. And I chuckled. I was like, what do you do? He's like, I'm a chiropractor. And, he was very forward thinking and wellness and nutrition, and like watching them eat like open sandwich, no bread on top, chicken salad, egg salad, but like nothing, watching my mom make, 3 pounds of mayonnaise and celery and everything else that goes in there. By the time you eat it, you're having mayonnaise with it.
Yeah.
But it's intriguing when I see people that do that and push, into what you're doing now. When did you make the switch? Like, what was your driving force when you went from fitness? Because I think earlier you said, like, when you were early on in academics and sports, you were doing that, and then that big push to nutrition. What was that drive? Was there something with you, or did you see it or just inspired? Like, where'd that happen? Where was that aha moment?
Yeah, I think I was always into, again, the nutrition, and it kind of went hand in hand. I think there was a lot of that. My dad was an amazing, and still is, like a really great cook. My friends would come over when my brother and I weren't even home, and he'd be cooking for our friends, and so I think, or I'd come home from school and he would, make whatever I wanted. And so he was the one going to health food stores ahead of time and was just always really into it. So, and, being Italian and traveling and these things, the way we grew up, I mean, food was always a big part of kind of just, I think, the conversation. Yeah. I mean, it's a big part of cultures and bonding. And so, I mean, I have some of my, best memories around that. And it was always really good quality food. So I think it was just, being around that, and then, being an athlete myself, and then working with athletes and seeing the idea, if you're going to have longevity in something, that it's the analogy you hear time and time again. If you knew you only had one car for the rest of your life, you would take really good care of it. So, our bodies are synonymous to that car, right? And so it's what we're putting into our bodies. Our bodies are made up of trillions of cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs. Organs function and dysfunction together. So it's what we're putting into our cells that is information for the body, right? So food is information for our cells. So I think understanding how powerful that was, and there's ways to, live longer, live better, optimize the aging process. And a lot of that is through what's at the end of your fork, as opposed to what's maybe going to be at the end of a pill bottle, which there's a time and a place for both. But, nutrition is always just a really good jumping off point, where it's something that's in your control more sometimes than other things that maybe feel more arduous for people or feel sort of defeating by nature. Maybe you're not going to run a marathon or, do a bodybuilding competition, or things that just feel difficult. You have to break things down to a really small basic level. And nutrition is something that for most people, you can go to the store and say, all right, if I have 2 options, this one's probably better. Let me try and work on my averages with my health here. And I just saw the needle move for a lot of clients I was working with over the years. And it was just really great to see that kind of feedback. So it was just something that from there, it sort of snowballed, and realizing then that nutrition is, again, like I said earlier, one small piece of the health puzzle. But there was so much more, because I would dig deeper, where I'd work with people and it would be like, okay, your nutrition's perfect and you're doing everything well, but you're still having sleeping problems, or you're still having pain, or you're still feeling, not like you're recovering well. So we had to dig deeper. And that's where the functional medicine side, the Paul Checks of the world and the Dr. Mercolas and the Dr. Hymans, the people who were really ahead of it, chiropractors, I think, were so ahead of it. I'm sure you saw how much the chiropractic field has changed over the past 5-10 years, right? You would go to chiropractors back in the day and people thought you were weird, hippy dippy woo-woo stuff, and now it's a really big part of creating a healing team.
Well, you see it. The reality is this is, now that we're starting to get some national, international attention, you'll get the occasional haters to say you're not a real doctor, you're not real that. And I love the opportunity that I've had over the years in my professional basketball training career to have worked with so many professional athletes. And I was always asking them like, hey, tell me about your team treatment. And literally they rattle off acupuncturist, chiropractor, physical therapist, ATC, CSCS, functional nutritionist. They're all there.
Yeah.
And what they realize, at that level, first off, it's all funded, right? These are multi-million dollar, even some of them are billion-dollar organizations, and they're getting it for free, but they can't take drugs.
Yeah.
Right. They test or they can't go on. And so you see that, as, my fellow peers in chiropractic were like, hey, we've been saying this all along. And now working together and creating those synergies. I've always said, we were just talking about before we got on, like the importance of a multidisciplinary approach to life.
So important.
And now they're putting into healthcare, they're putting into everything. And I've kind of always felt that way. And I was telling you before, again, my goal is to open up, wellness healing centers and truthfully be away from the healthcare insurance model because it inhibits people.
Totally.
Because then they look at what they don't have based on insurance, restraints versus, what you need. And I think that that's a huge thing that I see. Now, jumping back in, I love that you said this because you told me the day when we were talking on the phone that nutrition's low-hanging fruit,
Totally.
right? And I was like, wow, that's amazing because when you hear fitness heads talk, they're like nutrition's everything. But probably for me, my biggest tie-in was I noticed whenever I got anxious, and I know you have some funny little coining phrases for you and how you deal with and how you compartmentalize, anxious behavior and how you control it even in yourself. What is the big push with anxiety and nutrition that you find connecting with your clients/patients?
Yeah, I mean, anxiety is something I'm really passionate about. I wrote my dissertation on it. It's something that I think is a really misunderstood emotion. And I actually ended up creating an e-course called Befriending Anxiety because it's like any emotion, right? People don't question when they're feeling happy because that's not going to last and that's transient, right? But when people are feeling anxious, there's a lot of layers that can go into it, like anything with our health, right? It's going to be multifactorial. And there's actually different parts of the brain that elicit different anxiety responses. So there's our prefrontal cortex anxiety, the logical, overthinking, circular, repetitive things, right? And that's maybe where we see some more of the neurotic type A, every single morsel, I have to track everything, right? Health anxiety is a very real thing, right? And you just kind of start to feel out of control. And when I see it with food, a lot of the times it's people thinking that it's something that they can control, but anything you try to control controls you, right? So a lot of the times I see this slippery slope where it's a lot deeper than food. That's what they're putting the external validation on, but it's usually self-worth, it's self-love, it's not feeling enough, it's needing external validation, praise, right? So it goes deeper than that. So that's, that kind of anxiety. Then you have, what we call amygdala-based anxiety, so the limbic brain. That's when you quite literally feel anxious out of nowhere. And that's the kind of anxiety when somebody says, just calm down, you can't because your prefrontal cortex, which is your logical part of your brain, quite literally gets overridden. So you're quite literally feeling some kind of way. And that's also sometimes where people will do a self-soothing sort of treatment modality of maybe they will overeat or maybe they'll have sugar or carbohydrates because on a primal level that can actually modulate our serotonin levels, right? So there's a lot of people who blanket statements like that. It's not that simple, but there is some level of that, right? Instinctively, why our body does that. Or maybe there's a memory tied to when I was young and I was stressed out, my mom would make me X, Y, Z, right? So there's a really big emotional component with food, how we were talking earlier. A lot of my memories are around food and eating, right? So if I'm feeling some kind of way, I joke a lot on Sundays, Italian household, we were eating all day. Psychologically, every Sunday, I can just never get full and I want to eat certain things, right? So we have things that are tied back to it. So what I always want to remind people when it comes to anxiety is that it's not bad in it of itself, right? It's any emotion. It's just a form of information. And the more we can sit with it and befriend it and understand it, the more we can understand what we need to do and take action with that.
Love the power of that statement. What I think, I'm going to put you on the spot here, morning rituals and routines, right? That's big for me. I know that when I was going through my COVID experience, right, I had a flare up of the GBS. I broke my back. Then I got injured. Like it was just a wild, cascade of just bottom of the barrel. Anxiety for me was always sports performance anxiety, which because I was a perfectionist, it actually was always a strength, not a weakness. I'd get wet hands. I may have to I got to run to the bathroom. Then all of a sudden I dropped 35 points. But if I didn't, and I was just haphazard, I knew I was going to have a bad game because I wasn't locked in.
Totally.
But this type of anxiety was completely different. It was sleep deprivation that rolled into 91 days of sleeplessness. And then it started becoming anxious to say, am I ever going to fall asleep again? Am I ever going to get better? And by the way, I stopped eating, and all these things were going on. And I look at my life in early practice and the amount of people I inspired, and I would never say diet. That was like a filthy word, if you will. I would always say, feeding the machine, or, the fuel you put in your car, and you want to treat your car like a Lamborghini. You don't want to treat it like a beater. Right. Sure. And I think that one of the best things that I hear when I get somebody that inspires me that comes from a platform of education is be able to convey it in a keep it simple method, right? I think especially with guys, I think you run into what I see, I switched probably my last 10 years of professional coaching to the female athlete. I got tired of what I felt like I was arguing with myself talking to these young boys because they knew it all. They were doing it perfect. They were experts, yet, they could do nothing. And I kind of lost that fire to push. Now look at the female athlete. Unbelievable. Sitting there with a notebook, taking notes, coming back saying, hey, I tried that. It worked, but would you have another suggestion for this and that? And I go, oh my God, I'm in love with this field. Sure. And, I had always thought right before, I think I was 49 now, right around 45, 46, I was probably peak shape, and I'm like, God, I felt like Peter Pan. I'm going to be training forever. And then COVID, a couple injuries happened and it spiraled out of control. But the reality is that what I found the most, and I love hearing you talk about anxiety, was when I got stressed and that anxiety shifted. It might've been the first time that whether it was alcohol to calm something down or food or not eating food, it was amazing how I was all those people I'd always give a weird side eye at. And now I'm one of them. Yeah. And, and I still think now it's my fitness journey, when people see what I post on our social media that you're looking at, that's been a battle inside of me. That has been something that I try to tell people. I'm hey, even today's post was about, fitness and exercise is medicine. Right. And what I could do 5 years ago, I can't do now. But I'm laughing if I go to, the recovery place. I go to this one spot. It's literally just a Russian sauna and ice bath. Right. And I'll walk in and I'm I'm closer to 50. I am 30. And I walk in every time and the kid will go, dude, what are you 30, 35? And I'm I could be your dad. I go, but thank you.
My morning routine's working.
I use good stuff on my skin.
All the serums.
But, the reality is that I think there's such an importance beyond the financial reward of what we do, because there's so many lost souls out there. And knowing that I was there, because forever, I always thought of myself as a beacon of hope for the kid that was the almost made it. And I helped get them there. The kid that was cut, that came back to be all shore. The kid that transferred, guy or girl. And that was kind of my superpower. And when I lost that, I was well, what's going to be my new superpower? Because I didn't have an identity. Right. And so when I hear what you do, because at first I was oh, she's a nutritionist. I was oh, so not.
It's really funny whenever people ask me what I do, or people ask, this is a joke, when they ask my mom and she's well, trying to go on and explain. It's kind of like what you do, right? You have your title, I call it your LinkedIn, click whatever. And then it's what you actually do. So for me, it's easier to just be yeah, I'm a nutritionist, because to get into it and, say, not that it's necessarily over their heads, but it's a lot deeper. And people, I think, want to be able to compartmentalize things and be okay, so you just talk about food or whatever it is. And so I think it's, with anything with our health, it's always evolving. And so I think even people having an understanding of what nutritionists do, and, nowadays, I'm sure you see it, there's a lot of coaches out there, and, everybody can write a diet plan and a meal plan. So it's a lot deeper than that, because even as a nutritionist, if that's even what you do, there's a lot of different fields that you can go down with that. You could be somebody who specializes in meal plans and macros. You could be somebody who works on kidney stone diets or oncology, or, so there's a lot of different ways. So I think it's also just
inflammation.
Yeah, inflammation, which is what we actually need. Otherwise, you'd be dead. But that's just another topic for another time. Yeah, so I think it's just helping people broaden their horizon and their definitions about what this means and how our health evolves as we evolve, which means that the industry is evolving too, and we need to evolve our relationships with how we even talk about some of these topics and trends and titles.
100%. It's funny, as a chiropractor, or doctor of chiropractic physician, when people ask them, that's my designation, but I always love thinking of myself as a healer, or putting the body in the best state it could be in to heal itself, right? It's a self-healing organism, right?
Yes.
As we were told.
Isn't that part of the oath of a chiropractor about getting yourself out of your way, basically, to heal itself? Isn't that?
To be honest, yes. But it's funny now, because when you're listening to the Gary Breccas and the medical shift, they're taking that, mindset, platform, whatever you want to call it, and we've been running with it. Like that's how we kind of changed how we treat patients now, whether we're utilizing PEMF or a laser therapy or shockwave or cryo. We wanted to be able to give patients something that was beyond the fold of standard medicine.
Yeah.
And when we're talking to them and really educating them, because always people say, where can I read more? And very rarely do we send them to our actual website. We're sending them to the Mayo Clinic. We're sending them to the National Institute of Health. We're sending published medical articles or studies somebody's doing independently, because I want them to see the amount of thought the science that we're using is creating in the research world.
Yeah.
And we had a patient that's coming back in, and I think that when you have a large practice, you're not going to love every single of them. God knows I try, people out there. So just in case you think that might be talking about you, but the reality is that they came in, and healthcare is not cheap, and the person came in and we didn't even get to treat them. Like, they didn't even make it past the waiting room, and they went in and they were like outwardly rude. And, but it was funny because I felt bad because I knew we could help them. They went out 3, 4, 5 locations, and Matt, that's offset right now, had me laughing because he goes, "Remember that guy?" And I felt bad because I wasn't going to let him back in because he was so rude to my staff. And he went 4 places, didn't get any better, researched all the technology as we told him. Yeah. And was like, "Hey, I'm coming back to treat." Yeah. And I was laughing. I'm like, you should have stayed the first time.
Yeah. He's I think like a relationship life coach. His name is Matthew Hussey. He's really just quite brilliant in how he speaks about things holistically in life. And he talks about the idea of how difficult it is to not only, change ourselves. So this idea of that if you think you're going to change somebody else, but it's the idea of if you're trying to get somebody to, let's say they're shopping for a car, right? It's hard enough to get somebody to buy a car the day that they know they're going in to buy a car, right? Like I went to the dealership today and said, I'm going to buy a car. The chances of me actually leaving with a car are very, very low, right? So you have somebody going in who not even quite sure that they want to make that leap. Maybe they're like, I like walking, I ride my scooter, I'm a bike person, right? So it's that idea of change happens when you're tired of your own bullshit, is what I say, to be candid. And you have to reach a point of, I'm tired of telling this story. I'm tired of this narrative. I understand the work that I have to do, and I have to unlearn certain things that don't serve me anymore. And I have to also take responsibility for how I participated in allowing whatever it was that got me to this point in my health journey, for better or worse. And a lot of that takes that self-reflection of saying, you know what, I might have been the problem here. And I allowed pro-inflammatory people, thoughts, environments. I was engaging in whatever it was. And until that happens, you can be in the best place ever, have the Dalai Lama himself come down, shaman, heal you. It has to come from you wanting to do it.
From within. Agreed. It's funny. During the injury, now I'd say, I spend so much time. I was reading, what's Dave Asprey, I think his name. And I'm amazed with how these people at this elite wealth put in. But I spend a ton of money on staying healthy. And what you were saying as far as like toxic thoughts, self-thoughts, and existing in like memories, right, of who you were or what you thought you were. And then, who are you now? Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that listening to these successful business people that then transcend into podcasters, public speaking, whatever. The reality is they all have a common message, is who we bring with us in life have to be like-minded. And where separation, and like we talked about earlier, they say this is like a season of separation, where separation occurs is when one person is stuck. And then when the other person or people, I don't care whether it's business, personal, family, coaching, you see it all the time in sports teams. And, the reality is that if you don't have a common vision that is shared and expressed and somebody's living in the past, it always seems like a formula for disaster.
Yeah. Alignment of vision and values, whether that's a job that you're at, a friendship, a romantic relationship. I mean, relationships are relationships, whether that's the relationship with yourself, your relationship with your body, your food, your friends. So you have to have an idea of, where do my values align and where are they not aligned? And again, that requires an honest discernment, right, on your part. And then I think it also is about, again, taking responsibility for what's not serving me anymore and what are these self-limiting beliefs. And a belief is just a thought that you keep thinking is true. It's your truth. It's not a universal truth, right? So it's understanding what belief has maybe been handed down to me or pre-programmed into me because of the way I grew up or the, relationships I've been in or whatever it is, the team I was on, right? And how can I start to challenge my thoughts and my beliefs and rewrite a new narrative, which takes a lot of time.
Now we're catching fire.
Totally.
Now this is why I love it. So I think this is where your work gets special, because when you start hearing people talk and really listening to what they're saying, you realize that a lot of their current problem, and I think you noted one of my guys, Eckhart Tolle, in one of your, being present, right? And I think so many people get to where they are and don't even know who they are. And meaning like they're falling apart because of, like a lot of successful business people say, your success or failure where you are right now happened months before and you just missed it.
Right.
Right. And so do you find that you kind of try to peel those layers, and when you're talking to a client or a patient, how do you, if you will, emotionally undress them to get into that, to get back to saying, well, we need to address this because you're not thinking right. I could tell you a million times what to eat, because how many people fail diets in a simple nutritionist meal prep, calorie counting, macros, whatever way fail a lot. And what would be your spin on when you're meeting somebody on that intake? How do you get there? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like when you feel like, wow, that person's got a lot going on.
Yeah. A lot of it, my process personally, when I work with people, is it's a really thorough intake form process. And any of my clients can attest to this, that when they're doing it, it probably feels really annoying because there's a lot of questions and sometimes the questions are repetitive, but I'm asking it in a different way. I do that, yes, for me. It gives me a blueprint where we can look at everything from your liver to your adrenals, kidney, gut, supplements, herbs, right? Like diet, all that. But at some point, there's a couple of buckets that's going to happen in our life. And so one of the first questions I ask when we have our first session is I say, so when you were filling out the intake forms, was there anything that came up for you that you weren't aware of? Because a lot of the times it's, when was the last time I actually felt well and felt like my best self? And what happened in my life right before things started to become unwell or fall apart, right? Because it's rarely the moment that it happens. A lot of it is really that either death by 1,000 paper cuts, or again, the pile of clothes in the bedroom that's stacking and stacking and stacking. And it's that one last thing, right? And we blame it on that one last thing, but it's rarely that. So, first it's getting people to a place of saying, yeah, when I was filling it out, I kept realizing that I was like checking off the stress part a lot, or I didn't realize that I'm really not kind to myself and I don't ever give myself time to relax. So it's getting people on some level, again, to number one, just have some honesty with themselves. I always tell people too that they don't get extra credit for filling out what they think I want to hear, right? I can only help you to the level that you're honest with yourself and you're honest with me. So I think it's that. And then also, I'm sure you hear this a lot. I have a lot of people who say to me, this is the first time I feel like I'm being heard. So many people just want to feel seen and heard and understood in a place that feels safe to them. As hippy dippy woo woo as that may sound, life is tough. There's a lot of things that we're dealing with, and we're usually the hardest on ourselves. 100%. And so health, when we put it again on whether we're tying it, again, many people will come to me thinking it's a weight thing or a food thing. And we dig those layers back and we realize it goes back to, yeah, I went through a really stressful divorce 5 years ago, or I'm struggling financially, or I had a really not great upbringing. And so a lot of that, over time, there's a lot of books. Yeah, the body keeps a score and all of that, right? Little T trauma, big T trauma, people can go down those different rabbit holes, but it does add up because, your mind, body, it's all connected. I talk a lot about psychoneuroimmunology, this bi-directional relationship that happens. So everything that we put into our body, including the food, but also the thoughts, the energies, all of that is what's nourishing our whole body. So until people can really undo and unlearn things that got them to the place that they're at, that operating system is not working anymore. So you have to get them to see that, number one, and to have to sometimes do less to get more out of their health. And that's really hard. I'm sure you see this as well, but that type A, I was perfect in school and my career and sports, and I was the best. And they're trying to be perfect at health. And it's always a moving target. So it's even just, again, challenging those thoughts and those definitions and beliefs that you've had for so long that aren't actually serving you anymore, and slowly letting those go and forming better ones that are going to be better serving for you.
I love that. Probably how I would connect to that is now, especially that we treat with these, again, you're saying these wild out there technologies, but it's funny. In pro sports, they're known. In the upper elite healthcare and the people that are trying to reverse their age, and you see all over there, they're using them. But when people come in with multi-regional pain syndromes, I'm blown away with, it always comes to mental. And before they get to the physician of any type, and we learned and emulated our practice off a practice in Georgia, and it's a non-operative orthopedic. And I was studying his practice and I was like, I like what this doctor does. Before you see him or any of his staff, and the questionnaires were so thorough that by the time you got to him, he could diagnose you walking through the door saying, Brianna, this is what you have. I didn't even say hello. It's,
Yeah.
And when we adapted that into our practice, it was an absolute game changer. We're not wasting the patient's time. They're not wasting our time. We're giving them a viable plan, an action plan. And much like we were excited to get you on the show today, because I think there's a huge spot. I was just talking to one of my patients today that's like going through, I mean, if you look at it from, a helicopter flying over, you'd go, oh, this guy's an amazing life, just sold a company for $150 million, blah, blah, blah. But there's a divorce, there's a new relationship, there was an injury, a bike crash, and then all the emotional sequelas that happen around that, the excitement of raising a company to that level of greatness, then leaving a past life, a new life, the new kids, the new stresses. And he goes, I want to find the best version of myself. I want to lose the 10 pounds I found. I want to this, and that. And it all started with mental. And the funny thing about it, we tell people all the time that our PEMF therapy is pretty wild. And you see patients that come in with high level anxiety, high level stress, and they search it out. We, as much as we advertise, and I know you compliment us on our social media, when people are struggling, really struggling with what I call SAD, sleep deprivation, anxiety, and depression, they're looking everywhere because they're not sleeping. And when they roll into our clinics and they go on a PEMF pad, it's amazing to watch how fast, when the first thing we've read, or like you said, the iterations of how many ways can you tell me you can't sleep?
Exactly.
And they're on there, and in 3 minutes, they're like this.
Yeah.
And they're out cold. And when parents see it, and they're talking about their child, their, the love of their life, their firstborn, et cetera, and we allow them to rest, it's unbelievable. And I always say, I'm like, the goal for what we do is to give you a peaceful mind. Because if you're constantly battling chronic ache, chronic dis-ease, then you're always anxious. And I know for me, that was one thing that, again, when the podcast and the coaching, that was, like you said, it wasn't the last thing. Because I remember when I really took that injury going into COVID, it was nothing. It was literally me burning myself out, working all the time. And what was just a normal amount of work for me was just the spark that finally lit that powder keg. That was like, the body just said, done.
Yeah.
And I think when we're talking to patients, and I'm sure you've seen this in your personal experiences and also clinical, when I find a patient is being, what's the word I'm looking for? Difficult to be honest. Like you said, if you don't tell me the truth and you give me the answers you think I want to hear, we'll get nowhere. I had a female patient that went to multiple surgeons and was telling them what we do. And they actually lost the surgical case. She would have went somewhere else because they say, oh, it's going to take about 4 surgeries to fix your neck. Terrified her. She wasn't going there. Another one said, I have no idea if that's going to work. It might. I've never heard of it. Give it a try. So at least she was like, kind of like that guy because he said, because you don't want to see me until the absolute necessity.
Right.
Right. And then the third one she went to and thought he was educated, but very blah. She was like, I don't know if I can let this person touch me. He put me to sleep halfway through the exam. And she got back to me. And it was amazing to see her story of what got her there.
Yeah.
And I was chuckling because on her body, there was a tattoo. I said, it's a cool tattoo. What does that mean? Chaos. And I said, your whole life? She goes, excuse me? I said, well, how long has that been there? She goes, quite a long time. I said, well, has your whole life been? She goes, and she's an artist. She goes, yes. And tell me about your workout schedule one more time. And it had to have been like 20 or 30 hours a week on a 7-day week, plus full-time mom, full-time, career, art direct, very impressive. And I was like, I get it. Whether we're running at demons or running from them, but go to a certain point, we all burn out.
Oh, absolutely.
And, she's like, look, and I think we first met her in August when I was doing a ton of fitness videos and fitness photo shoots. I was in ridiculous shape and tan. And I laughed because she's like, well, you don't understand that. I was like, let me read off the list.
Yeah. It is so interesting. Perception is reality, right?
It just is intriguing, right?
What people see, and that's, you never know what somebody's really going through. And just because the masks that we choose to wear, and some people hide it better, and some people have coping mechanisms that for health, right? Health has a really fine line of being obsessive in the sense where it could become unhealthy, right? But people aren't going to really give you a hard time a little bit, right? I call them health bullies, like, oh, look at you bringing your water, you don't want to drink, right? These kinds of things, or you're ordering whatever at dinner, but no one's going to really bat an eyelash as much as, right? So maybe you're that person who's over exercising and you're really hard on yourself and you're really hard on your body, and that's gets a little bit more of a pass, but that's a way of self-soothing and dealing with trauma or whatever you have going on or sadness. Other people overeat, other people drink alcohol, other people do drugs. So you just never really know what somebody's going through.
I think that's a huge spot. That's the one thing when I sat there and she came at me and I was actually wearing glasses I chuckled. She goes, you take your glasses on and off. And I said, it's funny. So you had so many compliments. I fractured my skull on this side and I was paralyzed on this side of my body. So her face was like,
yeah, you would never know.
And I was like, so I have a weak left eye. And, if I'm staring at charts, especially paper charts versus electronic, I don't see them that well. Mm-hmm. She goes, I would never know that. I go, yep. I said, when I was your age, I had my knee rebuilt and I was 12 weeks on a CPM machine. So she's like, well, tell me what that is. I said, for 12 hours a day, I couldn't come out of this machine. It would just move my leg while I was waiting for the graft to take. And she's like, and I said, yeah. And, and I started listing off the injuries. I said, what I realized when I built out my first center, I researched like crazy because my goal was to get back to health. Mm-hmm. And we built out Velocity in Red Bank based on, former NBA Hall of Famer Jason Kidd, who came back from the injury. There were like 4 players that came back. And I said, well, if they can do it and I follow their formula, then I can do it too. And, Tom Bellella was still alive. God rest his soul.
Oh my God. I was so sad about that.
And when, Tom was amazing during this time because I called him. I was like, Tom, me, I'm a foodie, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel like I eat my nutrition, but I need you, mm-hmm. right? I feel like I'm going to need all the, horn of this and whatever. I go, bring it on, buddy. And he gave me like 24 bottles of whatnot. I have to tell you, I wish he was here today to thank him. I don't know whether it was the discipline and whether it was someone's placebo or not or whatever, but I felt so amazing. And I never changed the timer because when I found out he passed, I had a timer that was the 3 a.m. timer that said F-U-K. It was uni.
Yeah. That's funny.
That it was like, I'm coming. And when I first started in the pool aquatic therapy, it was part of this program that I got from the New Jersey Nets. At first I was walking. Mm-hmm. And, it was 5 foot of water. I'm 6'3". So I was, pretty much 70% of her. And then I was jogging. Then I was running. And by the end of my rehab, it felt like the scene when Rocky was in Russia, carrying the telephone pole on his back. I was able to almost run out of the water, like come up and come off the ground. And I was like, what's amazing? When you have the conviction and then people get behind you in some science, some nutrition, and some caring, it's amazing what the human mind can accomplish.
I mean, I think it's a tale as old as time. The quality of your thoughts determines the quality of your life. And what people don't realize is that your thoughts influence your feelings, and your feelings influence your actions. And your actions, it's what ultimately gives you the results that you're trying to get to. And so many times people will either try and white knuckle their way through action starting at the wrong point, and then they don't stick to it, because if they haven't really gone back to the original operating system of that chain of thoughts, feelings, actions, results, then there's when the going gets tough, when we're tired, people just go back to their default setting. It's human nature, right? It's why old habits die hard. If they die at all, you're lucky. So you have to go back to the top and work on that. But again, that's the kind of thing that's not sold in a supplement bottle, that takes time, that takes honesty. And it's really messy and not really fun to sit there with those feelings and emotions. So it's a lot of, again, that, how did I participate and what can I control? I actually recently just had a friend who gave me the example of, especially with the conversation of anxiety, he called it the circle of control. So if we weren't sitting, I would tell you to stand up right now and just do a big full circle. That's the only thing you can control right now. And it sounds so simple, but when I'm a visual person, when I heard that, for someone who's, again, anxiety, it's your body thinking that there's a perceived threat. You think you can control something. You're trying to think of all the ways it could go wrong. When's the shoe going to drop? What can I do in my control? But when you really think about that, if I stand up right now and do a 360, that's pretty much it right now.
That's it.
I can plan, and I can have an archetype, and I can have a blueprint of sorts. I can have tools that I'm putting in my toolbox that are going to be helpful for when things don't go as planned. But most of the time, it doesn't go as planned. It's the way it is versus the way it seems. And a lot of the problems that we have is the way it seems and not the way it is. So it's, again, kind of just working on that operating system of how can I, again, be more prepared? And so much of that does start with your thoughts. But that's easier said than done. When you're having a good day, you can be all holier than thou,
Yes.
Eckhart Tolle, all the things. I've been Dr. Wayne Dyer reading, my mom's been reading me
Agreed.
my whole life. Then I have a bad day and I'm calling my brother or my mom, my dad on, repeat, being like, all right, get me off the ledge right now, because all of the things aren't working. So it takes a lot of work.
For me, it was journaling and visualization. When I was going through the fear crisis, I was unbelievably, and I have done every stupid thing known to teenagers, jumping off bridges down by where you live to, canoeing and jumping off things and landing and this and that, and never had one fear of injury. And when I got to a certain age, it took every ounce of me to overcome bending over to pick up the hair shampoo. Mm-hmm. And I laughed that I had to visualize it and see it. And actually, it was funny because, what was his name? Dr. Dispenza, Joe Dispenza. Uh-huh. And when I got into meditation, I am a hyper person. So getting me to meditate is almost as
anxiety inducing.
Oh, yeah. The first couple of times I'm like, am I there yet? Am I there yet? And
is this nirvana?
Because this is a struggle. And to be honest with you, the key for me with meditating was, the pulse pen technology. So when I went on there, it would slow down my heart rate. It would slow me down. And then I could get into that relaxed state to then go to visualization. Mm-hmm. See myself bending, see myself moving, see myself jogging, walking fast, running. And then it all started coming back.
Yeah, it's wild because the imagination is so powerful. And actually, a lot of people don't realize that anxiety is a misuse of your imagination. If you can imagine the worst case scenario and things being terrible, why can't you imagine the best? Why can't you imagine yourself picking up the shampoo? Why can't you imagine yourself crossing the finish line? Why can't you imagine yourself whatever the life that you want, right? So a lot of the time, the power of visualization and your mind is incredibly powerful, but that starts with you.
100%. And it's funny, as we're wrapping up this episode today, I have to tell you that first off, I loved it. I love the information you bring. I think we're definitely going to do this. You're going to be
You're going to come on my podcast.
I'm coming on,
it's going to
yes.
be great.
And I think the one thing that is the common thread with all of the people in this health wellness space that get it, it's the importance of a clear mind and also evolving. I think that, I've noticed as of late, people are like, you're changing, whether they're saying for the worse or the set. I said, you know what? I heard Ed Milet say this. Of course I'm changing. You should always be changing. You should always be evolving. And if you're not, you'll find yourself, and I see it all the time when I'm talking to patients when they're telling me about something they did 20 years ago. I'm like, well, it's December of 2023, about to be 2024. I couldn't do what I was doing 20 years ago. But right now, what do you want to do right now?
Yeah.
And I think that evolution is such a huge process of the human development. And that when we can keep that on, whether it's functional nutrition or chiropractic or wellness healing or any of the mind-body fixes, if you will, I think putting it all together is a huge part of the equation. But anyway, Brianna, absolutely a pleasure having you on the show today. Guys, you're going to check out her stuff. You're going to see on our platform. We're going to list it. She is absolutely special. And again, our first female guest was an absolute superstar. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.